Good afternoon, everyone. It's always a delight to be with you all. I think it's my third year now. So thank you for that warm welcome. As I say, no pressure to have to perform in front of everybody. But I'm going to give us a little bit of an overview about where we've come from, where we're going. I'm afraid there is going to be some AI in it. I don't think you can have a presentation at all without some AI. But what I think is really interesting as we go through this is that we're going to talk a lot about how cyber threats are evolving. And let's be honest, they're evolving all the time consistently. We could do this every year till the cows come home and talk about the evolution of cyber threats and what we need to do in response. What I find fascinating in the last year is how well our defences are working and how much those threat actors have had to evolve. So what I'm going to encourage you to do is to just put on your rational thinking face for a little bit and kind of really deeply think about how these threat actors have had to go one step further than where they've had to go previously. And I do think it's a positive sign of what's going on and what's coming. But if I was just to kind of sum things up a little bit of where we've come from, I think it's fair to say that the threat actors are evolving at scale. This time last year, we were talking about how aggressive they are, how complex they are, and I think that is still the case. What we're seeing more of, ultimately, is these attacks are going more and more against the human. So yes, we see a lot of technology-based attacks, and we see AI, and I'm going to dig into that a little bit more. But ultimately, where these attacks are going is they're really looking at the most vulnerable assets in our company, and that ultimately is people. But the state actors themselves are evolving as well, and they're using these kind of proxy groups that you've probably heard of. They're hiding behind other groups. And so we're seeing a lot of state actors working in unison with activists and also organised crime. And what that ultimately means is attribution is getting really hard because it's not that easy to be able to say 100%, is this Russia the state? Is it Russia an affiliated actor, or is it something else? Is it a lone wolf? And the problem is, when you start naming and shaming, it actually has quite dire consequences when you get it wrong. I think ransomware is evolving, and I'm going to talk a little about that. They're getting more aggressive with their targeting and who they're targeting and why they're targeting. Particularly, I think we've always talked about cyber is not just an IT problem. It transpires, it goes into OT, it goes to IoT, physical security, all of these things. And I think, as Anna was saying earlier as well, we're seeing more impact across supply chains. But they're being more deliberate with how they're targeting supply chains as well. They're really looking at the upstream, downstream impact and where am I going to have the most effect for the least amount of effort. I'm going to talk a little bit cyber mercenaries. I'm going to talk about the insider threat, and I'm also going to talk a little about AI because as I said, you can't have a presentation about some kind of AI in it. But I think ultimately what we need to get used to is what we call operating in the grey zone. So this is this area between peace and conflict. And I think when we talk about conflict, we're probably used to thinking about what we see in Israel, what we've been seeing in Russia, the kind of kinetic attacks, if you like. When we talk about the grey zone, it's the bit in the middle. So it's this kind of polar opposites, if you like. We talk about east versus west, good versus bad, black and white, red and green, all of these things. The grey zone is the bit where we really need to focus our attention. And this is where a lot of the cyber sits. It's not very visible. So we hear cyber warfare, hybrid warfare. We now have cyber influence operations. And this is arguably where a lot of the threat actors, particularly state actors, are investing a huge amount of effort and a huge amount of money. And so what they're trying to do ultimately is play the long game. So we're talking a lot about the short-term impact of some of these cyber attacks and how they're evolving. But if I was to roll the clock back 3 years ago to the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Russia really went to town with their level of disinformation and really trying to stoke up a lot of fear-mongering on social media. So what they were trying to say, in essence, is the reason why you can't get a job, the reason why your interest rates are so high, the reason why you can't get access to all of these services, because the amount of money your government is spending on all of these refugees, bringing all of these people into the country. And now you're having to fund all of this. Now, 3 years ago, they started not doing that just in the UK. They started doing that in the Nordics. They started doing it in Germany. They started doing it in France. And what has happened since? So in the last year, multiple countries have all gone through elections. From a result of all of those elections, we're now swinging more right-wing than we've probably swung in a very, very long time. And that is because they planted the seed 3 years ago. And that's because they actually watch, they wait, they start to actually control the narrative, and they try and force us into a particular situation. And so this is what they're trying to do. This is the long game, and they're willing to play that out, in essence. So part of that is they're creating all of this huge amount of information. We call this the AI slot wars as well. So when you're thinking about just the sheer amount of rubbish that is being funneled onto the social media every single day. So we talk about some of this AI is absolutely amazing. Some of it is so realistic, we can't tell the difference. And another load of it is absolute rubbish. And they're doing that on purpose, because they're flooding all of this social media with all of this AI slop, in essence. It's getting really, really hard for detection tools to be able to keep up what is real, what is fake. I don't know the difference. What is the aim of even publishing all of these things? And so in essence, even when we talk about deep fakes, we talk about how these are being used and how they're being used disproportionately, they are ultimately targeting women and children disproportionately to the rest of the population. So we just kind of think about even deep fakes mimicking celebrities, for example. About 4,000 celebrities that have had their images used in non-consensual intimate imagery. It's very hard to say. But also a lot of that is about 80–90% of those are women, and a lot of those are also being used as child abuse material as well. So this is just something that we have to live with, and that's something we have to understand. And this is the constant world that we're living in. But ultimately, as we said, the whole aim of this is to really challenge us in what we're thinking about, how we're challenging perception. What is that right and wrong? How far we're swinging one way or the other. And this is ultimately the hardest thing to be able to control, because how can you categorically say who is doing this stuff and why? But it's something that we've got to be really mindful of, about how a lot of this technology is being utilized and how it's going to continue to be utilized. If we were going to sit here 3 years from now, how different does our government look? How different does our voting practices look? And how different does our tolerance look to the people in our own country or people coming into this country? So we've got to really consider cybersecurity has gone way beyond the boundary of what we traditionally think about from an IT perspective. We're going to think about this role of cyber mercenaries. So in essence, this is private sector actors who are building cyber weapons at scale. So you're probably thinking maybe NSO Group in Israel. If you're familiar with them, they created Pegasus, which is mass surveillance software. Now, Russia, again, I'm not picking on Russia per se, but they give a lot of good examples for us to talk about. So as a result of a lot of their own population turning against their government, particularly a lot of the young people who are questioning, let's say, some of the choices that are being made, some of the morality, some of the ethics, what they're seeing being played out across their country and across their neighboring countries as well. So Russia have creating multiple private sector companies with the aim of creating mass surveillance software, not to surveil all the other countries, but to surveil their own people. And so there's a lot of this mass surveillance software was utilized for maybe checking journalists or human rights activists, but more and more it's being utilized mainstream. And so when we're thinking about these kind of weapons, if you like, the quality of some of these things, we used to be government level grade. So I think a really great example that we've probably seen in the last sort of 10 years or so, if we think about WannaCry and NotPetya, that utilized stolen malware, Eternal Blue, if you're familiar with that. That came from the NSA. But that was a self-propagating malware. And we already know the damage of that. NotPetya, I think, is one of the most destructive cyber attacks we've ever seen. It cost $80 billion in impact to all of those companies. But in essence, a lot of these sort of private sector entities are getting wise to this. So no longer am I just selling this to governments. I'm selling this to the highest bidder. So a really good quality 0 day of the level that these people are creating is roughly about $10 million. Now, maybe you're a government, you could probably spend $10 million. If you're an average cyber attacker, maybe not. You might be getting some stuff that you can find, and you're getting these cyber ransomware kits off the internet for a few $100s. You're certainly not paying millions for a 0 day. Who is paying millions for a 0 day? Ransomware operators. They've now figured out, I've got enough money to spend, and these private sector actors, they just want to be able to sell their tools and technology just like any other enterprise to the highest bidder. So highest bidder, now I'm going head to head with a government, and I'm now being able to put these tools into mass production at a massive scale. So now I'm able to use a lot of this technology that I never had access to before, really good quality. And as we know with the 0 day, what isn't coming very quickly is a patch. This is like open season as far as some of these threat actors are concerned. And what am I going to target with one of these, a $10 million 0 day? In essence, I'm probably going to hit up operational technology. I'm going to hit up energy grids. I'm going to hit something that's got huge, massive impact. And that is what we really need to be mindful of. The scope and scale of what we've seen previously is going to get bigger and bigger. The impact's going to get bigger. We talk a lot about wake-up calls. I actually challenged Cyber UK earlier this year. This should be a wake-up call for government. This shouldn't just be a wake-up call for organizations, because if you've got companies that are producing this level of technology, you've got criminals and other governments who are willing to buy and use this technology. What is the government doing to actually help and do something about this? But in the interim, until they all catch up, and how many wake-up calls that we need and they need, this again is really something that we need to be cognizant about how these threats are evolving, the hands of these criminals and what they're prepared to do as a result. So what I think we can safely say is they're scaling for impact. And in essence, we talk about supply chain attacks, as a lot of these have been played out openly in the last few months. And we can kind of look at this sort of downstream versus upstream. So at the bottom end, if you like, you've got some really niche specialist providers of services. At the top end, I might say managed service providers, even cloud service providers. But I think the real sweet spot for a number of these ransomware operators is in the middle. So if I can affect downstream and upstream at the same time. And so, yeah, we kind of see a lot of these things being played out on the media, because the media love to kind of have these massive big companies that they're just household brands. If I was to start naming and shaming some of these other mid-sized companies that no one's heard of, I'm not going to get the clicks that I want or the readers that I want. So yeah, a lot of these big companies make the news, but that actually is not where the impact is. And so one of the things that we've got to be thinking about as well is, where are they really targeting? So I want to go midstream. I want to go to the ones that probably don't have the same level of capability, the same level of resources, the same level of know-how as a lot of the other companies. So this is where I want to cause as much impact as possible. Now, that's not to say they're not going after the managed service providers, and they're not trying to use those as an access in, but we've got to kind of think about ultimately that 80 to 90% of all ransomware attacks are in that midstream level. The average price, I think, is around 300,000 euros. So yeah, we're hearing these massive, big, multi-million type of attacks, and they're still going to happen, but they're at the top level. Most of these are just churning their way through some of these other type of companies. But ultimately, they're kind of learning our defences, and that's one of the things that I'm going to be talking about. This is why I said it's interesting with regards to how they're evolving. So we talk a lot about the fact that you should be using the cloud and you should be utilising backup software and having all this immutability. So what do I want to do is I want to intercept a lot of the backups. I want to intercept the communications. I want to stop your ability to be able to forcibly be able to say, I'm not paying because I've got a backup, I've tested my backup, and so they're breaking all the links. They are actually doing their homework and making sure all of that capability is in place before they actually launch their attack. And so what they're learning is, how do I live off the land? How do I do exactly what I need to do and do it with stealth? And so we do see some threat actors who are smash, grab, and in and out. They're as noisy as possible. But ultimately, if I'm learning how you're detecting me, I'm learning how you respond. So this time last year, I talked about the success rate of ransomware was actually going down as a result of multiple companies that had actually deployed successfully security monitoring software, XDR, extended detection and response. So I'm able to see the big picture, right, with the attacks coming through identity, its endpoints, lateral movement, getting to data, exfiltrating data. You've got to do all of that without anyone detecting you. And so where you were deploying that software, it was working. So what do? Did they stop? No. They have to figure out, how do I do what I need to do without your detection? So this is actually them building resilience into their environments and what they're doing. So we talked a lot about the proxies and that level of attribution. I don't know where the attack's coming from. I don't know what their capability is. I used to be able to track and trace, and if I knew who the threat actor was, I knew what their intention was, and I could follow their modus operandi, and I knew what they were going to do next. So by hiding and being able to cut and paste and all of these things in and out, it gets really hard to be able to track. It's really hard to attribute. And so in essence, what they're doing is, if I know that I'm going to have to figure out, I'm going to have to blow my own attack, so to speak, if you like, I'm going to have to stop, I'm going to have to pivot, I'm going to have to do all of these things. And so what they're learning to do is actually extend the cyber attack, multi-attack path over extended periods. So this means that it's not a short and fast cyber attack. So yes, they can be in and out within minutes, but they've already done their homework. The phishing attack, the first stage attack, might have actually happened months ago. And it's really reliant on your ability to take a log from here, correlate that with an incident that happened here, correlate it with something else that happened there, and be able to tell a story. What the reality probably is you're looking at as 10 different incidents rather than being able to gel them all together. Now, we talk a lot about having logs and keeping these logs. So just to give you an example, if Microsoft collected every single log at its disposal, it would equate to 1 exabyte of data, which would also equate to $100 million of storage, just on logs. So it's not actually really beneficial to a lot of companies to say, let's just collect every single log that we could possibly have just on the off chance and be able to correlate all of these things together. So we actually need to get smarter on what it is we're ultimately trying to protect and what is it we're ultimately trying to be able to see. So this is just another part, but we're seeing a huge increase in the insider threat. So we talk a lot about this kind of malicious insiders, if you like, and we're seeing this huge increase in super malicious insiders. So the normal malicious people are those which are just, they're disgruntled, they're a little bit fed up, maybe they just kind of don't care anymore. I don't care about your phishing email, I don't care about you, I don't care about your processes. And then these people become disillusioned, and the middle management layer, believe it or not, is where most of these malicious or super malicious insiders are coming from. So these are the people that are trying to explain to the leadership team up above about all of the processes that aren't working, the help they need, the investment they need in security and technology, and they're not getting anywhere. And they got all the people on the ground who understand the reality, who are basically reporting all of these things, all of these gaps, and nothing's happening. And so these people ultimately are the ones who are primed for sabotage, because these are the people who have access at a much higher level than a lot of the lower level people. And arguably, you may not be monitoring those people to the same degree because these are your trusted employees. But at the super malicious level, these are people who might work in security. These are people who might work in IT. They might even work in your fraud department. They might work in your audit team. And so these people understand what you're looking for and not looking for. So it's either I'm trying to do something by my own means, but these are also ripe for threat actors who want to gain access. So I think last year, again, we were talking about some of the threat actors who were willing to pay up to $10,000 to some people, insiders, just to get their credentials. Just walk away, go and download this software. When you get the MFA prompt, just ignore it. $10,000, I think, is a lot of money to a lot of people when there's not a lot of impact, and just walk away. But the interesting thing is also what they're trying to understand is when I do come at you with this extortion demand, and a lot of the executives are now understanding that they have to be fully prepared from a crisis management perspective. And they're kind of going through all these simulations, and they're really steadfast, and we're not paying, we're not going to allow these cyber criminals to dictate to us what we're going to do. So what are they learning to do? They're actually high precision targeting on certain individuals in that executive team. So maybe it's a COO, maybe it's a CFO, whatever else, and they are actually blackmailing those individuals. So maybe because they've done their homework, they already know who's who, they already know who's going to be on that management team. Maybe they've already been on their social media, maybe they know who their children are, maybe they know some other information. And in essence, they use that to actually try and blackmail that individual to sway the opinion of the other members of the executive board. And so again, we've got to be really kind of thinking about how our processes are working from top to bottom. When we talk about the vulnerable people in our organization, these are not just the people who are sat on email, clicking links and falling foul to some of these things. It goes right up to the top, right up to the CEO level. So we've got to be thinking of all of that combined. What we've probably seen as well at the same time is people who are being planted deliberately by threat actors. Probably the most significant that we've seen in the last couple of years, North Korea, who are trying deliberately to get their IT people employed into the organization. Now, this is from a number of different perspectives. Some of them, they just want to be able to make some money. So when you think about North Korea, you think about the regimes, you think about the fact that they're having to steal money, they're having to steal crypto. What if I could actually just earn money the traditional way? So if you're asking me to do some software, I'm pretty good at software, I have to say. I'm pretty good at defense. I've built all of this capability. And so rather than those IT workers going to do cyber attacks, why don't I actually do a legitimate job? So there is some that is literally just doing that. They're earning money and sending that back to the regime. There are some who are playing the long game, as we said, in terms of I deliberately need to get myself employed into your company. Now, one of the interesting things, you probably heard the story of KnowBe4, where a North Korean threat actor infiltrated into that organization. It passed all of the checks, by the way. So all of the HR background checks, the CIO even interviewed this person on a Zoom call, said it was the best candidate by far that they'd ever seen. Well, it would be, because they'd made sure that they were the best candidate they'd ever seen. But the interesting thing from that, they said they couldn't really work out, or they were trying to gain access, what was their end goal? And so part of it, they think, they just wanted the email address. Because ultimately, you think about the supply chain, you think about the legitimacy of the supply chain emails and trusted relationships that you have. So if you have an email that's coming from KnowBe4 or Kocho or Microsoft or whoever, and it's real, this is not a hyperglyph or made up thing. This is actually a real person in a real company who is contacting you. They're a genuine employee. It's just the fact that they've been planted. But the interesting thing as well, they don't even need to make fake credentials anymore. They are actually going to university. They are actually getting themselves employed in industry. And I think the interesting thing we then have to think about, what's their ultimate game? What are they ultimately trying to do? Are they trying to bounce through? Or the company that they're in right now, is that their ultimate target? But again, if you think about it, if you think about how difficult it is to pass a lot of the security checks and background checks and making sure that it's a real identity, and it's not synthetic, and the credentials are correct, and you actually did go to university, it's just not a completely made-up profile, they're learning this and they understand this, and that's why they're willing to put all these people through that process. So as I said, 3 years, 5 years from now, they've got an actual work history that is real. These are actual real people who are being employed. So that's what I kind of sort of say is we've got to not just think about the here and now. What is the end goal of some of these threat actors and what are they doing? But interesting, initial access is still the prime target. A number one target, if I can get cloud identity, happy days as far as I'm concerned. Why would I waste my time going through individual people on the off chance that one of those people might have some credentials? Probably not, so I have to spend my time going through lateral movement, elevating privilege. As we just said, if you've got good security monitoring in place, you're probably going to detect that, you're probably going to lock them down. So I want to go straight to admin, straight to tenant admin, because ultimately if I control M365 at the tenant level, I control everything. So I can now enroll new people, I can enroll devices, I can change the MFA, I can set up mailboxes, I can move mailboxes, all of the things to my heart's content. So about 50% of all cyber attacks, I think it was about August last year, it was all cloud identity. That is it, the holy grail as far as they're concerned. But that doesn't mean all cyber attackers can't all go and hit cloud identity. Now, this is why I said it was interesting with regards to look at how they're evolving. So it used to be, we always said, phishing dominated. 80% of all cyber attacks used to start with phishing. Look what's taken over. Click fix now equates to nearly 50%. Why? Because it's increasingly getting more difficult for that phishing email to have any effect. So the way we train, the way we scan, if we're trying to get someone to go to a fake domain and put all your credentials in, and then you have to go and open this attachment, and that attachment might have a macro running, and that's running malware, but you're running an EDR, so you're probably detecting that. So what am I going to do instead? How do I get my objective? How do I get malware into your environment without relying on a phishing email? So what do instead is I pretend to be your IT help desk. I actually pretend I'm here to help you, and so they use ClickFix. In essence, all you need to do is give me remote access into your environment, maybe even on the back of CrowdStrike incident last year, we saw this huge increase. I'm just going to help you download some new software onto your device. This is going to make sure that this CrowdStrike incident happens, never going to impact you, and we're going to make sure you can back up and do all the things. Cool. So just give me access and I'll just do it. I'll just download it. The thing is, when they're actually downloading it and running a command on their own device, it's bypassing a lot of the security controls. And so that's what they're relying on. This is the user themselves is doing it, not a threat actor. Even though the threat actor might be giving them something to a command or something like that. We now see this increase in AI-generated emails. In essence, this is really refining the language. And again, they found out that we're training people about how to not go to fake domains. Don't click the link. Don't open the attachment. So what do I do instead? I use text-only emails. And this means my text-only email, the language in that has to be so good that I still need that person to take some kind of action as a result of reading this email. So the click rate on AI-generated emails has gone to 50%. The average click rate for a normal phishing email is about 12%. That means they're not sending random emails, they're finely tuned. Because I need to know the difference between, am I talking to someone who's 18 or am I talking to someone who's 80? Because the language is very different. And I wouldn't even understand half the language and acronyms and whatever the young people are using these days. But that's what a threat actor needs to figure out. What is it that's going to make you specifically do what I need to do? And so the other thing that they're realizing as well, something odd is going on in your environment. What have we been saying all the last year and the year before? MFA, MFA, MFA. 100% of users, 100% of the time. You spot something anomalous in your environment, I'm going to send you an MFA prompt. Where am I sending it through? I'm going to send it to your device, or maybe I'm going to send it to your email. I might tell you need to, something looks a bit weird, can you reset your password? So if I'm sending an alert to that user, now, what if I send 100 alerts or 200 alerts at the exactly the same, maybe 200, 300 emails that I generated to that person, and the actual real one that's coming from the company that says, hey, MFA alert, hi, can you take some action? Was this you? Can you just verify? Is now hidden in all the emails because that person thinks this is spam. I'm being spammed all over the place, and they ignore the real email. So now you're getting multiple alerts hitting off all over the place, and this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to drown out the real alert from all the rubbish. Remember I said about this AI slop wars, and I'm just going to push all this rubbish onto you so you cannot figure out which of all of this is real, what isn't real. Imagine your security operations team is being flooded with all of these alerts that are being bombarded on multiple users simultaneously, and you've got to help figure out which one of those is real or not real. Now, the other thing that they're doing is that the first payload is an information stealer. So I'm scraping everything. So it used to be we just steal credentials. But if I want to get cloud identity, if I want to get the crown jewels, I don't just need credentials. I need to steal tokens. I need to steal a lot of information that's based on your machine. I need to understand patterns of behavior. I need to watch you. I need to steal. I need to put all of these things in place. And then they've also realized, remember the Authenticator app that Microsoft brought out that said, in essence, not all MFA is built the same. So what we're going to do is when you get an MFA prompt, we're going to tell you where this prompt's coming from. So you can look at it and go, oh yeah, no, I'm actually in the UK, I'm not in India, so that's probably not right, because that's be impossible travel. Hence why they're using this location proximity emulation, which in essence is I'm just bouncing around. So now, yeah, I might actually be in India, but as far as you're concerned, I'm in the UK. And so you look at it and go, yeah, that's probably about right, maybe that is me, I'm just not really paying that much attention to it. And then obviously they're using the bots for the information they finally get to hit up as many accounts as possible and to try them out at scale and at speed. And so when we kind of think, okay, but what is the ultimate objective? So it's still exactly the same. So for me to get any return on this investment at all, what am I actually in your environment for? Most of the time it's data. It is what kind of data. And in essence, it doesn't really matter who I am or why I'm trying to gain access to you. You just really need to kind of figure out where's my data, who's got access to it, and why would they want it? What are they going to do with it? What are they prepared to do with it? And so the interesting thing is you might be looking for mass exfiltration of data and looking for that kind of data loss prevention. What is also interesting is looking at what has been accessed and when. So are you looking for access as well as exfiltration? Because a lot of the threat actors, they have no idea what the value of that data is. Unless they're specifically looking for that information. So maybe if they're a state actor, they're looking for research, they're looking for policy information, they're tracking particular individuals or trying to get something specific, then they probably are. They know what they're looking for. If you're a ransomware operator, I'm going for volume. So we hear about, such and such a threat actor, they stole 500 million records, right? Okay, but what is it? What is that record? Is that a name and address? Okay, so what? Name and address is not really that important in the big scheme of things. If I'm stealing medical data, trade secrets, yeah, I'm going to be a bit worried about that. But also, if it's an activist or an insider, again, they're probably looking for the stuff that you really don't want out in the public domain at all. So if you've got whistleblowers or you've got anyone who thinks you're being a bit dodgy, that stuff that you thought was going to be secret for many moons, no. And so that's the real thing that we need to look at, is really understanding that ultimately the objective does not change, irrespective of all of the methods of attack. Now, this is where I'm going to get into AI. So about this time last year, maybe the year before, when we were talking about generative AI, which is only 3 years old, by the way, it feels like it's been out for a very long time, we said at that point, we felt like we had the advantage back from all the threat actors, because we said, well, we've got more computational power, more data, more know-how. Yeah, we're going to win this race. Not anymore. So we went from generative AI, AI agents, and agentic AI, which is where we are right now. It's probably 2025 is the year of agentic AI. Do you remember when generative AI came out? We said humans always got to be in the loop. We've got to always, it's going to augment the human, not replace the human. Until agentic AI came out, and we said, wouldn't it be a great idea if we actually were able to remove the human completely out of the equation and let the AI do the decision making? Let the AI work out what we should do and how we should do it, and give it access to all the data and all the infrastructure, and we can fully automate, and we can do all the things, and we can let it be adaptable, and we can get it to conduct research, we can put all this stuff out. And the really worrying thing, I have to say, is the bit at the bottom, which is emulating empathy. So we know it's not real, doesn't think, it's still a machine, it's still software, but the way it's emulating empathy, people think, and we've seen this already, they think they're actually talking to a friend, they're having conversations, they're naming the AI, and then they're kind of getting really into these conversations. And some of this is being put into a mental health perspective as well. So rather than the AI kind of looking, I'm literally looking at your face, the way you're speaking, the language, the stress that you're under, I think this might be a great opportunity for me to put you in front of an actual human, but they're not. They're actually making decisions and telling this individual what to do and how to do it. And we've seen some of the impact of that. And so ultimately, we've got to kind of think about, this is only 3 years, and we've already talking about how do we take the human out of the loop. So we're back to equal footing again. So as the new technology comes out, it gets mass-produced by big tech. Big tech wants to commoditize it, it becomes cheaper, it gets into the hands of other threat actors. So the advantage to all the adversaries is exactly the same advantage that we're trying to get as well. So in essence, they're using it for speed, efficiency, there's no human in the loop, so they don't need to worry about human fatigue. Particularly when you're thinking about security operations, as Anna was saying, we're augmenting the human, not replacing the human, so we're still reliant on agents, human agents inside security operations going up against agentic AI, which can just hit and bombard you over and over again. So we talked about them using reconnaissance. So they're looking at, okay, I'm looking at all these companies, who am I going to target? Maybe that mid-market we talked about. We're looking at the vulnerable targets, we're looking at why they're vulnerable, and we're looking at how we're going to attack them. So we talked a lot about this lateral movement. We've got to my objective is still data, I still need to get in, I need to move across, and so they're figuring out the path of least resistance. I think a great example that we've seen in the last week was, we talk about protecting the crown jewels. Great job, France, I have to say. 4 minutes. 4 minutes. So when we talk in and out within 4 minutes, irrespective of the controls, the alarms, all the things that you put in play, they figured out the path of least resistance. It's just to blend in, cut a hole in the window, get in and out as quickly as possible. And that's still their objective, right? Get in and out as quickly as possible. But they're trying to counteract all the things. So they're rerouting, they're figuring out all of these things. And from the AI's perspective, it's just looking for patterns, it's just looking for vulnerabilities. How do I exploit? The bit at the bottom is the thing I find really interesting. So we said, oh, when we're going to get to AI versus AI, that boat sailed already. We're already in that game already. So agent-to-agent attacks, so prompt injections we've heard about already. It's how do I socially engineer a machine? If I can socially engineer a human quite easily, all I need to do is work out how do I ask the right question in the right way, give up its code, give up its information. But I can also hijack the agent. I can actually misdirect the agent, and I can get the agent to do what I need to do at the same time. So this is a constant battle of, as we build defenses, they have to re-engineer this constant cat and mouse game. So what's our AI advantage? In essence, it's exactly the same in reverse. So as soon as they evolve, we have to evolve. We have to counteract what they're doing, which means that we also have to act with precision and with accuracy and with speed. Now, the comment at the bottom has actually come from Microsoft's own Cyber Defense Operations Center. So you think about how hard it is to be able to manage a hyperscale level of security across all Microsoft services and data center. Because remember, your objective is really easy, really, really easy. It doesn't sound easy when you're putting it into play, but then ultimately, you need to detect and respond quicker than the adversary. That's it. So you need to be able to get them out, you need to respond, you need to do all the things. And that's really hard because they are building processes in to make sure that they can stay in. And so in essence, this is about slowing them down. So yes, we now have this thing called detection engineering. And so looking for all the vulnerabilities that are out there, looking for how can they exploit these vulnerabilities. We talk about attack path, understanding attack path, understanding attack path disruption. We have to understand that because that's what they're doing. They're trying to understand that attack path, the least opportune moment to get in and get out. So what do? We talk about having decoys. We want to say, this is the data you're looking for. It's over here. It's not over here. And so we push them down a different route. We close the path. We do all these things. And that is, in essence, exactly what we're doing. This is where we're back to this kind of cat and mouse thing again. Maybe our opportunity is to have digital twins. Maybe they're building digital twins at the same time. So this is about being able to test at scale. And so where do we go from here? What are we trying to do? So we talk about safe and secure AI adoption. But this is ultimately coming back to exactly what Anna was saying as well. We've got to have human validation. So those high stakes decision making. Yeah, it's cool to have agentic AI and we're going to have this evolution. But ultimately, we still got to have that level of control back when we're talking about safety and resilience. And we've got to have this concept of the AI agent is exactly the same as a human agent. And I think this is people are not prepared for this. So let's say, for example, today you might have 100 people in your organization. You might suddenly deploy 500 or 1,000 agents. You've now got 1,000 identities on top of the human identities. You've got to track and trace everything that they're doing. You've got to put policies in place. You've got to put information protection in place. You've got to make sure no one's socially engineering the AI agent. And you've also got to make sure there's no policy drifting, there's no hijacking going on, there's no social engineering. So actually, having an AI agent, yes, it's going to help. It also just makes things a lot more complex in terms of securing them as well at the same time. So we've still got to have identity-based controls. We've got to have information protection, and we've got to understand the ethics. And I come back to this point, human in the loop. Yes, it's great to kind of think about all the automation, but ultimately, can you take back control and can you revert them out? And I think this is where a lot of companies sort of have a little bit of a meltdown. Because ultimately they're thinking, I want to automate more and more things. I want to use AI embedded in more and more things. And therefore, I don't necessarily need the human anymore to do some of this stuff. But if I had to revert the entire thing out, can you do it? And what is the reaction from the business? So we talk a lot about secure by design. We've got to have the AI secure by design and by default. Now, the other thing I find interesting is we're now talking about AI agents in guardian mode. So These are your governance and compliance agents now. So we're used to having human governance and compliance. We're now going to have AI governance and compliance. So the AI is monitoring the other AI to make sure the AI is being right. I then think, isn't there going to have to be another guardian agent to make sure that that agent isn't an insider threat? So the problem doesn't go away just because it's an AI agent. It actually makes things more complicated. And so we've got to think about all of these things as well at the same time. But this means also we've got a scenario plan at scale. Now, my background is in crisis management way back when. And I still would say I have never, honestly, hand on heart, seen any company who can really articulate what their worst case scenario is and whether they are truly prepared right now. So I think they want to kind of skirt around it and kind of go, oh, it's too hard and difficult, we don't really want to go there, so can we just look at a different scenario, please? But this is the reality. This is the reality of what we actually need to be able to explain to our board. Are we prepared? Are we not prepared? Are we doing the right thing? Now, you've probably heard of chaos engineering. It's a thing that Microsoft has also put out. So when you're building a lot of your services in the cloud, we throw the kitchen sink at it. In essence, they're weird and wonderful things. This is all the stuff that we have to work out when we're putting code in all these new systems. It's the same principle, chaos engineering on an AI system, which sounds like completely mental to me when you're thinking about what could possibly go wrong with an AI system that's gone into crazy mode. Let's think, shall we? But this is ultimately where we need to be, and we need to understand, and we need to put the right controls in place and have the right accountability, as we said about can we actually take it out? If we can't take it out, should we be putting it in the first place? And ultimately, as we said, it's still software. And I think it's however cool this technology is, it's still software, it's still vulnerable, it's still going to have issues with code, it's still going to need patching. And so we need to know which AI model we're using, to what extent, and can we patch it or not? And if we can't patch it, well, we know what happens when we don't have patch machines. The threat actors get in, and then we know what happens when the threat actors get into these machines. Well, now they're controlling the AI model at the same time. So what is the opportunity? Ultimately, there's kind of two opportunities for boards and for technology. Well, the first thing is you've got to understand the big picture. So whatever's going on in the outside world has a direct bearing on the inside of what we're doing. So like it or not, geopolitics comes into play. We've got to understand how the will and the motivation of those threat actors are changing. We talked about how aggressive they are. We talked about proxies, cyber mercenaries, all of those combining together, willing to play the long game. Are you prepared for that? And a lot of this really comes down to culture, particularly as we said, they're targeting the human at scale. Whether they're using those agentic AI, social engineering, the click fix, whatever the case, because they've really figured out, because you've got such good security tools and monitoring on your technology, I'm still going to go to the human and get the human to do what I need to do. This is why we need this level of psychological safety, because it's going to get harder and harder for anyone, let alone a machine, to tell the difference between what's real and what's fake. And therefore, we can't put the blame back onto the human when they can't tell the difference, because a machine can't tell the difference either. And so that's where we really need to be mindful. We've got to really kind of think, ultimately, what are we here for? We're here to protect the most vulnerable people, all the way up and down, and that data, the most valuable data, where is it, who's got access to it, why a threat actor wants access to it. And ultimately, this is about being prepared. As I said, what is the worst case scenario? I know you don't want to think about it, but ultimately, this is where we need to do our due diligence. This is where we need to get our leadership team prepared. Can you go to zero? Completely trash your entire environment and having to rebuild it from nothing. So that's probably the reality that we're in. And I think it's where we need to be. But just kind of bringing that back to the technology perspective, ultimately means is we need to have that dynamic defense. So this is about being visible to the risk and threat as it happens in real time. Can you detect? Can you respond? Can you do that quicker than the adversary? And I know the adversary is going to continue to evolve. And so how do you slow it down? And ultimately, that's probably where we can go at the moment. And we kind of talk about this secure by design. We've been talking about secure by design for a very long time. But ultimately, this kind of comes down to the tools and technology that you are choosing to begin with. So what AI model you're choosing, what tech you're using, and does that technology already have security controls, resilience, and privacy built in by default? Are you taking advantage of it? Now, what you've probably seen from Microsoft is more and more things that are being switched on out of the box. And just to give you a random example, a couple of years ago, MFA, remember, we're going to die on our sword with MFA. So we said of all the companies that have MFA, they've actually purchased it, only 26% of it had turned on. I said, like, you can lead a horse to water, but come on, guys. And so Microsoft decided, right, that's enough. We're going to turn MFA on, whether you like it or not. So that doesn't mean that you can't change your parameters and change controls and do whatever you need to do. But ultimately, these things are coming on out of the box. And so that's kind of the decision making. How much of that technology already has that? Can you continue to grow? Can you continue to innovate? Identity and data. Identity's number one access point still is. Remember that click phishing? But ultimately data. And where we're trying to get to is that level of resilience. And this is playing the long game, ultimately. So what investments we're making and just thinking about today, is that going to give us longevity over the next 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, or we're in this perpetual cycle of transformation? Because as soon as we've selected a tool, we've implemented the tool, 12 months later, the whole threat landscape's moved on again. And that's not ultimately where we want to be. We want to be thinking X steps ahead. And as we said, ultimately, the method changes, the mission doesn't. And ultimately, that's kind of what we've got to be thinking about.